Welcome to yet another Manor Lords guide. Today we're going to cover everything you need to know about food in Manor Lords as well as a bonus tip at the end. So let's dive right in. Let's kick things off with meat. If you have a wild animals deposit in your region, you can set up a hunting camp completely free and start hunting wild animals for meat. Usually this is one of the first things that I do since they start to gather hides as well. If you're lucky enough to have a rich wild animals deposit as well, it's worth taking the trapping and advanced skinning development points. And when available, take the hunting grounds policy. This will double your respawn times and this is super useful. If your deposit is also in a really annoying place, you can actually use a corpse pit to move it around until you're happy with the placement. Just be careful with this a little bit and save before you try. I've had a few issues with this in the past. Also, don't build too closely to the wild animals resource. Otherwise, they might migrate to another area of the region, or if you overhunt them, the deposit will completely disappear and will be gone forever. So don't do that. I'd also say that if you have a rich wild animals deposit, you can absolutely set up multiple hunting camps. I've had games before where I have 3 or even 4 hunting camps at max capacity. Once you have the development points and the policy, you can really go to town and you can get so much meat. It's really worth it. So don't just stick to 1 or even 2 if you have a rich deposit. Definitely try and expand, but just be careful and keep those limits safe. Next up, we've got berries, a seasonal food resource that begins to grow in March and stops growing around July. These are great if you have them in your region, and if you're lucky enough to have a rich deposit, I recommend taking the forest management development point to double the amount that you have, and you can get up to a whopping 256, which is so useful. It's also worth creating extra forager huts so you have extra pantry space. This is something that I learned quite late in the game actually, but it's really useful because often you will just fill up that pantry space so quickly and it becomes a little bit of a bottleneck. You can just have one family in each as well. You don't have to have them maxed out, but I did find that this is super useful. And don't forget to unassign your workers from forager huts when the resource is depleted for the season, because those guys can be assigned somewhere else. And moving on to a resource that takes a little bit more patience, it's vegetables. Everyone loves the veggie plots in Manor Lords. And to grow these, you'll preferably need a burgage plot with a big backyard extension and 15 regional wealth. With the latest update, these do take a little bit of time to get started, but I still think they're really worth it. And once set up, families living here will start to plant and grow vegetables unless it's winter. This is super useful as a passive food source, and I recommend having plenty just dotted around. They're super passive and hands-off, and they really come in handy without much effort required. This is also why I recommend going to meat and berries first while these veggie plots are in progress. These are great for food variety and keeping people happy, especially for burgage plot level 3. So for me, this is pretty much an essential thing to have in any settlement. You'll never struggle for food with enough of these. And next we have eggs, another nice and passive food resource. Similar to vegetables, you will need a burgage plot with a backyard extension and enough regional wealth to build a chicken coop. Unlike vegetables, however, this won't scale based on the number of families or the size of the backyard that you have, so do keep that in mind and the resource will be a little bit more limited. I don't use these in the early game since I don't think the output is really that good, but later when I really want to expand and I have enough cash to sort of spread around, I'll often make some of these just for a little bit of food variety, which I think really does help, especially to help meet those level 3 burgage food requirements. And since we've already talked about meat, we need to talk about sausages. These weren't out in the initial launch since it's a fairly new one, but with the addition of salt, we're now able to use meat and salt and turn those into sausages using a butcher backyard extension. I haven't used this too much since salt deposit seems to be few and far between, but I do think they're really good if you do have it available or if you want to trade for it. They do have a much reduced spoilage rate than meat as well, so I do think that's an added benefit. And the last food resource that requires a backyard extension, it's apples. Ever dreamed of owning an entire orchard? Well, now you can, and given enough time, you'll have more apples than you know what to do with. But you better be patient because these guys take 4 years to really come into fruition, so they're great for a long-term play, but if you have immediate need for food, I would definitely suggest something else. Apples will be harvested every September and provide some great food variety. I really do like having these, and I think they add a really nice visual to any settlement. So definitely consider these, especially if you're in a farming region anyway, and you're probably going to spend that development point moving up into rye cultivation. And speaking of development points, if you have one spare, why not unlock beekeeping and build yourself an apiary or two? Production is admittedly quite slow, and there are limits per region, which I'm not sure are technically in place, but that's what the tooltip says. I do think this is nice variety, and to be honest, I just really like the aesthetics of having some beehives in my town. I think that's quite cool. You can also unlock advanced beekeeping, which allows workers to collect wax, which you can then export for some cash, since it currently has no other use. But to be honest, since you only have 6 development points per region, I've never actually used one on advanced beekeeping. And next we are fishing, and no, this isn't RuneScape, but we do have fishing now, which is really, really useful. Since the update in September 2024, you can build a fisherman's hut near a shoal of fish, if you have one, and start gathering fish. 2 key things to note are that the fish source will freeze over during winter. Unless you have the advanced pond keeping development point, you will be unable to fish. I think this is absolutely mandatory if you have a fishing shoal, and it does also double the fish capacity, which I just think is super useful. I will always get this, to be honest. Secondly, fish do have a higher spoilage rate outside of the granary, so if they're sat in your fisherman's hut, they have a very high spoilage rate, so definitely get them moved as soon as possible. Nobody wants their fisherman's hut to smell like rotting fish. And saving the best and also most complicated for last, it's bread. Firstly, you'll need to get yourself a nice farmhouse and a field of wheat or rye. Make sure you check the fertility in your region for doing this, because there are only a few regions that tend to be pretty good for farming on every playthrough. Next, once you've got that sorted, let that grow, and when it's ready for harvest, you'll need to head back to the farmhouse and get that turned into grain. The grain then needs to make its way to a windmill, which can be turned into flour. And lastly, you'll want to send this flour to your communal oven or a bakery if you have the development point, and then it can finally be baked into bread. Although there's a lot more logistics and steps involved in this, I think it's a really great food resource, and unlike some others such as berries or wild animals, you can really scale this to meet your needs as you grow and progress through the game, so I really do like this one. It's also a great one to trade with other regions to help with their food variety needs if necessary, or since the bread gives you the best export prices out of all the food options, you can also sell this for a bit of extra cash if you want. And that's it for all the food varieties, but there's one last thing to keep in mind. I've mentioned spoilage a few times throughout the video, and I just wanted to give a quick breakdown on what this is and what it actually means. Spoilage is the amount of time it takes until your fresh food will rot, and then it's unable to be eaten. Here's a table I got from Discord, which is a really, really good breakdown of all the different foods and their spoilage rates. You can see how worth it is to have a really strong logistics to get things moved around and into the granary as quick as possible. A large granary does reduce spoilage, and I do think it is worth it. And to be honest, you're probably going to upgrade them anyway, because the capacity upgrade itself is super, super useful. I hope this guide has been really helpful, and thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what other guides you'd like to see for Manor Lords in the future. Happy gaming, and as always, see you in the next one.